They found Miss Langford early in the morning, long before the first bell rang. She was slumped over her desk in classroom 4B, her right hand still wrapped around a red pen, the tip pressed into an unmarked paper as though frozen mid-grade. The custodian, making his rounds, thought she had fallen asleep. Then he saw her eyes, open, glassy, staring at the blackboard where one word was written in uneven chalk: justice. The police found no signs of forced entry. The window was locked from the inside. The hallway camera caught nothing after 6:15 p.m. and yet the staff swore they saw her alive at 6:30. Papers were scattered across the desk, all marked in red ink. Most were essays on Shakespeare's Macbeth. Blood had seeped into some of them, but only faintly, as if it had taken its time. When I arrived, the air in the room felt stale, heavy with the residue of fear. I noticed the smallest things: a single chair pulled slightly back, a crumpled piece of paper under her elbow, and the faint imprint of a shoe sole on the desk's lower panel. The paper bore a name in black ink, Nathaniel Cross, and beside it a grade circled harshly in red, 42 out of 100. Miss Langford had written a note at the bottom: "You can do better." Maybe he thought he already had. Nathaniel Cross sat alone during lunch, at the far corner of the cafeteria where the hum of voices turned into a dull, distant murmur. Thin, pale, and perpetually hunched over a battered notebook, he seemed more like a shadow than a boy. When I asked to speak with him, his gaze lifted only halfway. His eyes were an unsettling gray, the kind that looked past you instead of at you. "Did you like Miss Langford?" I asked. "She was fair," he replied. I showed him the essay, the one with the 42 scrawled in red. His fingers twitched, almost imperceptibly. "She said I didn't try hard enough," he murmured. "And did you?" No answer. His eyes drifted toward the cafeteria exit, watching the flow of students as if mapping their movements. Later, I had his locker opened. Inside, neatly stacked essays were bound with rubber bands. Every one of them was marked in red, some with entire paragraphs crossed out. At the very bottom, I found a scorched scrap of paper, part of a report card. The edges were blackened, but the grade in the center was untouched, D+, circled twice. Students don't always kill out of hatred. Sometimes it's humiliation, and humiliation, left to rot in the mind of the wrong person, can grow teeth. The security office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dust. The guard replayed the hallway footage, leaning back in his chair with a bored expression. The feed showed Miss Langford leaving her classroom at 5:44 p.m., locking the door and walking toward the staff lounge. At 5:58, the screen flickered, static for 12 seconds. When the picture returned, her classroom door was ajar. "Camera glitch," the guard muttered, "but glitches don't unlock doors." I asked to see footage from the west courtyard. Grainy monochrome images rolled by until a faint reflection in the music room's window caught my eye. A figure entering 4B at 6:02 p.m. The silhouette was small, narrow-shouldered, carrying something long and thin at their side. The guard frowned. Could be a janitor's mop. It could also be something else. When I left, I crossed paths with Mrs. Pritchard, Nathaniel's English teacher. She pulled me aside. "He's bright," she whispered, "but fragile. When Langford gave him that grade, he shut down, stopped talking in class, stared at his desk for the rest of the week. Then she said something that lodged itself in my mind. He once told me grades are a kind of violence, that red ink is louder than words. Some kids get angry. Nathaniel got quiet, and the quiet ones worry me the most. The music teacher avoided my eyes when I asked about Miss Langford. "She stayed late last week," he said finally. "Said she needed to talk to a student about boundaries. She looked uneasy." That word lingered. I returned to classroom 4B after dark. The hallway was silent except for the hum of a vending machine down the corridor. Inside, the air felt heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. I moved slowly, scanning every surface. The shelves lined with literature classics, the neat rows of desks, the faint chalk dust clinging to the blackboard. In the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath lesson plans and a half-empty box of red pens, I found it. A sealed envelope, labeled in steady, deliberate handwriting, "To the principal, private." The letter inside was short but chilling. "He waits for me after class, never speaks, just watches. I asked him to stop. He left a note in my mailbox. You broke something in me. He's too smart for detention, too calm for suspicion, but I see it in his eyes, a patience that scares me." No name was given, but the portrait was clear enough. It matched the boy who sat alone at lunch, who burned the edges of his report cards, who stared through people instead of at them. Some children want to be seen, others want to be obeyed. Nathaniel Cross belonged to the second kind. Nathaniel's house sat at the far edge of town, a narrow two-story with peeling paint and curtains drawn tight. The yard was overgrown, littered with damp leaves. His mother answered the door, slowly as if expecting bad news. "We've had people coming by," she said. "Reporters, strangers. I don't want trouble." Inside, the air was stale. No photographs on the walls, no signs of warmth. Just ticking clocks and the faint smell of mildew. She insisted her son was a good boy, her voice trembling with each word. I asked if Miss Langford had ever contacted her. She hesitated before nodding. 3 weeks ago. She said Nathaniel had written something disturbing. A short story about a teacher who dies alone, holding papers marked in red. I thought it was just his imagination. She retrieved a manila folder from a drawer. Inside was the story, typed neatly, and on the back a drawing in black ink. A classroom, a woman slumped at a desk, X's over her eyes. On the blackboard, one word, justice. "Did you read it?" I asked. "I tried," she said softly, "but he took my glasses and told me I didn't deserve to see." Control through silence, punishment through symbols. I'd seen it in older predators who planned their cruelty carefully, but in a boy his age, it was rarer and perhaps more dangerous, because when a mind that young learns to kill quietly, it can stay quiet for a very long time. The school counselor met me in her office, a cramped space lined with motivational posters that felt hollow in the current context. She clasped her hands, eyes darted to the door as if someone might overhear. "Nathaniel is unusual," she began. "Intellectually advanced, but socially isolated. It's as though he's studying everyone, waiting to see who breaks first." I asked if he had ever shown signs of aggression. "Not in the usual ways, no fights, no shouting. But he has this ability to make people feel exposed without touching them. One substitute teacher refused to return after 3 days. She said Nathaniel stared at her so intently she couldn't think straight. The counselor pulled a file from her desk and handed it to me. "This is from last semester. Writing prompt. The moment everything changed." Nathaniel's essay described being 9 years old, returning home with a perfect test score. His father didn't look up from his phone. That was when I realized people only notice when you break something. So I started collecting pieces. "Pieces of what?" I asked. Her answer was barely a whisper. People. Their mistakes. Their fears. I left her office with a growing certainty. Nathaniel hadn't been pushed over the edge by a single bad grade. He'd been building toward this moment for years, patient and deliberate. Some children dream of who they'll become. Nathaniel had been rehearsing what he would do. I asked to speak with students who had interacted with Nathaniel in the weeks before Miss Langford's death. Most shrugged, offered generic comments, or avoided my eyes. Only one stayed behind when the others left. Jenna Morris. She stood in the art room doorway, clutching a sketchbook like a shield. "He doesn't talk much," she said, "but when he does, it sticks like a splinter." I asked for an example. She flipped open the book. Inside were pages of unsettling drawings, dark hallways, overturned desks, a teacher's silhouette looming over a faceless student. One sketch stopped me cold. Miss Langford, head bowed, mouth sewn shut with red thread. On the blackboard above her, "Grading isn't truth." He told me, "Grades aren't about learning," Jenna whispered. "They're about power, and people who abuse power should be erased." I asked if she thought he meant it literally. Her silence was answer enough. In her locker, I later found a folded scrap of paper, the handwriting sharp and deliberate. Perfection deserves ruin, otherwise it forgets it can bleed. Nathaniel hadn't acted on impulse. He'd been staging a story, piece by piece, inviting anyone who paid attention to read between the lines. The tragedy wasn't that no one saw it coming. It was that they saw and chose to look away. The interview room was small, windowless, and cold enough to make the metal chair bite through clothing. Nathaniel sat across from me, hands folded neatly on the table, eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. He looked more like a boy waiting for a piano lesson than a suspect in a murder. "You know why you're here," I began. A slow blink. "Everyone keeps asking me the same thing," he said, but no one asks if she deserved it. I leaned forward. Did she? He smiled faintly, not at me, but at the question itself. She told me once that writing was about control. You choose the words, you choose the ending. But she forgot. Endings can be chosen for you. I slid the crumpled essay across the table, the one with the failing grade and her note, "You can do better." His fingers brushed the paper, tracing the red ink like it was a scar. "I did," he said quietly. Silence stretched between us, thick as smoke. He seemed content to let it linger, as though the absence of sound was part of the answer. Finally, I asked, "Why justice on the board?" His gaze met mine for the first time. "Because truth is boring. Justice is a better story." Nathaniel wasn't trying to defend himself. He was crafting a narrative, and he wanted me, no, he expected me to understand my role in it. The librarian called me that morning. She said there was something I needed to see. In the back corner of the school library, she unlocked a small cabinet where confiscated items were stored. Inside was a stack of books Nathaniel had checked out over the last 2 months, all on criminal psychology, courtroom procedures, and the history of famous murders. One paperback caught my eye: The Art of the Perfect Crime. Its margins were filled with Nathaniel's handwriting, precise and deliberate. Notes about timing, motive, and the importance of symbolism. On one page, he had underlined a single sentence: "The killer must give the audience something to remember." Beneath it, he had written in red ink, "Justice on the board." The librarian hesitated before handing me a folded sheet she'd found tucked between 2 books. It was a floor plan of the school, with arrows showing the fastest path from 4B to the west exit. Next to the arrows, in neat print, 6:02 p.m. Nathaniel had been designing more than a killing. He had been scripting an event, something meant to be read, analyzed, and remembered. When I left the library, the corridors felt narrower, the air heavier. I realized this wasn't about rage over a single grade. It was about authorship. Nathaniel didn't just want Miss Langford dead. He wanted her to be his story's first chapter. I reconstructed Nathaniel's movements on the day Miss Langford died. Class ended at 3:15 p.m. He left with the others, but returned an hour later using the side entrance by the gym, a door that didn't register on the main security feed. From there, he moved along the science corridor, slipping past the empty chemistry labs. At 5:40, a witness saw him in the library returning a book. At 5:50, he was spotted near the vending machines, head down, notebook in hand. Then came the gap. 12 minutes unaccounted for before the classroom door was found ajar. I spoke with the janitor who had been mopping the hall near 4B. "I saw someone go in," he admitted. "Could have been him, skinny, hoodie up, carried something, not sure what. I thought it was just a broom handle." Inside the room, Miss Langford was still alive. Witnesses place her grading papers at 6. The blackboard was clean then. By 6:12, the door was open, the word "justice" written in jagged strokes, and Miss Langford was slumped forward, her pen still in her hand. Nathaniel hadn't rushed. He had walked those 12 minutes like a man crossing a stage, hitting each mark exactly when he meant to. The killing was not just an act, it was a performance. The day after Miss Langford's death, classes resumed under a strained silence. Nathaniel attended every period, sat in his usual seat, and took notes with mechanical precision. Several students told me they expected him to be absent, or at least shaken. He wasn't. If anything, he seemed calmer. One boy, Derek, said Nathaniel approached him in the hallway between classes. He asked if I thought stories were better when you knew the ending ahead of time, Derek recalled. Then he smiled and said, "I do." In the cafeteria, he chose a table in the center of the room instead of his usual corner. He ate slowly, scanning the room between bites as though measuring reactions. More than one student swore they saw him glance toward 4B every time the door opened. I asked the art teacher if Nathaniel had said anything unusual that day. She nodded reluctantly. He asked if I ever kept a piece of work hidden, not because it was bad, but because it was too good to share. I told him I didn't understand. He said, "That's because you're not the only audience." It was becoming clear that Nathaniel wasn't hiding his crime. He was curating it. Every look, every word was a deliberate brushstroke in the portrait he was painting. And we were all standing too close to see the full picture. I requested a second interview with Nathaniel. This time, he didn't avoid my eyes. He studied me as though I were another passage in one of his books, something to be interpreted, perhaps rewritten. "Why her?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Because she believed in merit." That's a lie. People don't want merit. They want comfort, and comfort is earned by keeping the powerful pleased. And you weren't one of the powerful. A faint smirk. Not yet. I slid the floor plan from the library across the table. You planned this. He glanced at it, unimpressed. Of course, a story without structure is just noise. What was the ending you wanted? His gaze sharpened. Silence. The kind that makes people wonder if they were ever safe at all. There was no anger in his tone, no regret. It was pure authorship, the cold satisfaction of someone who had shaped a narrative and seen it through. When the guard led him out, Nathaniel turned back and said, "Every book needs a first chapter. She was mine." The words stayed with me long after he was gone. Not because they were cruel, cruelty can be understood, but because they were deliberate, calculated. Nathaniel Cross had not just taken a life, he had written it out of existence. I spent the night reviewing every scrap of evidence, the essays, the sketches, the floor plan, the notes in library books. By dawn, the picture was complete, not of a moment of rage, but of a methodical blueprint. Nathaniel had studied Miss Langford's schedule down to the minute. He knew when she graded papers, when she left for coffee, when the hallways were empty. The camera glitch at 5:58 wasn't an accident. It coincided perfectly with the custodian's break, a gap Nathaniel could exploit without crossing paths with anyone. The word justice wasn't improvised. In one of his confiscated notebooks, I found drafts of it, written over and over in increasingly jagged strokes, as though practicing the signature of a character he was playing. And tucked between those pages was something else, a list of names, not just Miss Langford's, but 3 other teachers, each with notes beside them: pride, favoritism, lies. Miss Langford had simply been first. When I closed the notebook, I realized the truth. Nathaniel didn't view his crime as finished. It was an opening act, and if he hadn't been caught, each of those names would have followed, each chapter ending with the same red-inked judgment. He wasn't a boy who had broken under pressure. He was an author who had just begun writing. I confronted Nathaniel with the list of names. He didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed almost relieved. "You went through my things," he said calmly. "Then you know I wasn't finished." I told him the other teachers were under protection now, that his story had ended before the second chapter could be written. His eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in disappointment. "You think locking me in a room changes the ending?" he asked. "It just delays the page turn." I pressed him. Why these teachers? His voice was measured, almost instructional. "Because they believe the role they play is truth, but it's just a performance. I wanted to write them off the stage." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something beneath the calm: frustration. Not at being caught, but at being interrupted. "You're not the author here," I said. "Not anymore." He leaned forward, hands folded, eyes sharp as glass. "We'll see." As the guards led him out, he glanced at me over his shoulder. "You stopped me once, but stories outlive their writers. Someone will finish mine." The weight in those words wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And I knew the true danger wasn't Nathaniel's next move. It was the idea he had planted, waiting for someone else to pick up the pen. Nathaniel was transferred to a juvenile detention facility under maximum supervision. The school reopened with new security measures, counseling sessions, and a wall of flowers outside classroom 4B. Students whispered in the halls, voices carrying fragments of the story as if passing around an urban legend. I returned to the classroom one last time. The desks had been rearranged, the blackboard scrubbed clean. Still in the faint grooves of the chalk, you could almost see the word justice. I traced it with my fingertips, wondering if removing it entirely would make any difference. Stories, once written, have a way of lingering even when you erase the words. On the way out, the principal stopped me. "We found something in a returned library book," she said, handing me a folded sheet of lined paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Every ending is just a prologue. You taught me that." No signature, no date, just the chilling certainty that Nathaniel had left it behind on purpose. As I walked through the empty corridor, I realized the case was closed in the legal sense, but not in the way that mattered. Nathaniel had already succeeded in making himself unforgettable. His version of the story would outlive the truth. And somewhere, in some quiet corner of another mind, the first sentence of a new chapter might already be taking shape.